welcome or welcome back. Today we are going through the great books of Western civilization, beginning with the Iliad. This is book 13 from the Robert Fagles translation. I will begin with plot summary and then move on to analysis and commentary. As the fighting inside the Greek camp begins, Zeus withdraws his help from the Trojan armies. He turns his gaze elsewhere in the world, firmly believing that none of the gods will dare to defy his order to not get involved. Poseidon, however, was watching for just such a moment. He immediately goes to the Greek side in order to help them defend themselves, but does so subtly, trying to avoid detection by Zeus. Both Great and Little Ajax fight against Hector and his forces in the center of the battle. Without Zeus's help, Hector is unable to push through them, causing an indefinite stalemate. Meanwhile, Idomeneus and Menelaus are fighting against Paris and Aeneas' forces on the left side of the fighting. Poseidon appears and helps Idomeneus to kill many Trojan soldiers, including some of the captains. Polydamas informs Hector that his left side is facing great difficulties, and advises him to regroup all of his forces together in the center. Hector agrees and goes towards the left side to inform each of the captains there what his orders are, but finds that most of them besides Paris have been killed. This only fuels his fury as he returns to the fighting, the full bulk of his army behind him. In this chapter, it becomes more obvious that Hector's success is driven by Zeus. Homer uses several similes to communicate this to us. Tight formations led by Hector, like a deadly rolling boulder torn from a rock face. A river swollen with snow has wrenched it from its socket, immense floods breaking the bank's grip, and the reckless boulder bounding high. Nothing can stop it now, hurtling on undaunted, till it hits the level plain, and then it rolls no more for all of its wild rush. So Hector threatened at first to rampage through, but once he crashed against those dense battalions dead in his tracks, he stopped. We read some imagery suggestive of this powerful but fleeting sort of success in the last book as well. Think of the hounds and huntsmen circling round some lion or boar, rippling in strength as the men mass like a bastion standing up to his charge, and the boar's brave spirit never flinches, never bolts, and his own raw courage kills him. So Hector lunged into battle. Don't get me wrong, he's the best of the fighters besides the demigods like Achilles, but without Zeus's help, we see the battle come to a stalemate. Hector does not realize that Zeus has withdrawn his help, but he recognizes his need for it. They cannot hold me off any longer, these Achaeans. If the best of immortals really drives me on, Hera's lord, Zeus, whose thunder drums the sky, he knows that with Zeus's help, he can destroy every Achaean in his path. He's right about this, of course, but like we've said before, he doesn't really seem to understand or even question why. Hector is being given glory by Zeus only to add to Achilles' own glory. Similar to the image of the rock falling down the cliff. It's so powerful because of something temporary. Hector doesn't know this, though, and he doesn't realize that Zeus has withdrawn his help at this time, either. Meriones and Idomeneus' conversation supports what we've seen to be the Greeks' belief about bravery and glory in war. Before, we've heard that fathers told their sons to strive to be the best and the bravest, to stand high above all the others, and we see this idea reinforced here as well. Meriones expresses great fear at being thought a coward by Idomeneus just for going to his tent to get another spear. This is not a story where soldiers are terrified of going into battle, except for Paris. They relish it. If they are afraid, they would never admit it, and if they do something that makes it look like they're afraid, they defend themselves. They try to throw off suspicion, like Meriones does here. We have plenty more fiery imagery around Hector, and we do have a moment where he insults his comrades again, Paris, actually, and also moments where he's compared to a god or compares himself to a god. We've already been over what all that means. But there's something else going on in this chapter too, with the fighting. It's more pitiless than normal. Take Hector's comments to Ajax at the end of the chapter, for example. If you have the daring to stand against my heavy spear, its point will rip your soft warm skin to shreds. It's a normal threat on this battlefield. Then you'll glut the dogs and birds of Troy with your fat and flesh, cut down by the beaked ships. That's a little bit out of character. Hector's saying this to Ajax, somebody who he had a lot of respect for, at least at the end of book 7. They made sure to agree that whoever dies, they'd be given proper burial rites and everything. There was clear respect for the dignity of the dead, even a dead enemy. But here they kind of mock that and threaten to violate that, or actually violate that. Little Ajax beheads a corpse and gloats over it in rage. And then Idomeneus mocks the Trojan he's killed for fighting for love, basically, when that's what Menelaus and the whole army's here about anyway. I call this pitiless because there are lots of things like the dignity of a good burial or the desire to get married or something that the combatants have shown respect for in the past, even when it's their enemies who are doing it. There's an inherent refusal to acknowledge the sameness of your opponent to yourself in each of these scenarios. Things that were held as important or sacred or dignified in previous chapters seem to be not so here. Why? Well, I'm reminded of the quote from Knox, of course, that says, "The war has turned savage in its final phase," but I think that there's some element of divine intervention going on here as well. Poseidon is working against Zeus right now, and Homer tells us that both gods knotted the rope of strife and leveling war, strangling both sides at once by stretching the mighty cable, never broken, never slipped, that snapped the knees of thousands. It's an image that communicates that there's tons of tension right now. Everybody's fighting as hard as they can. The survival of either side hinges on these moments right here. Both sides are more desperate as well as more savage. Speaking of Poseidon, he says the most powerful line in this book. While giving the Argives strength to fight, he identifies the main conflict going on in this story, but characterizes it in a way that I haven't paid much attention to yet. The Trojans battle around our hollow ships thanks to our leader's weakness. Our men fight with him. What if it's all true and the man's to blame, lord of the far-flung kingdoms, hero Agamemnon, because he spurned the famous runner Achilles? I've spent time in other videos, of course, talking about how the Greeks are metaphorically and literally in many ways fighting against the rage of Achilles, or the will of Zeus. But Poseidon points out that it could just as easily be seen as Agamemnon's pride or refusal to humble himself before Achilles that is causing the strife. Recall that even in his moment of despair, when he thought all hope was lost, Agamemnon's request to Achilles was not that he help, but that he submit. His stubbornness is what is driving the rage of a god against his own people. But then again, hasn't it always? Even since Book 1? Homer tells us about a great metaphorical cable that's being stretched between Zeus and Poseidon, and by both of them pulling on it, it strangles the armies. But how much more so is there also one between Achilles and Agamemnon with the same effect? And that's what I've been realizing as I've been reading the Iliad this time around. A lot of the symbolic events in the Iliad are kind of like Russian Matryoshka dolls. They represent lots of things of many sizes all at once. For example, the metaphorical tug of war is going on both between Zeus and Poseidon, as well as between Achilles and Agamemnon. Keep that image of the doll in mind because it helps to understand a lot of what happens in the second half of this epic. There are tons of similarities and parallels between the actions and characteristics of various characters in the book, and they'll either lead to each other or will be happening simultaneously. This is something that Glenn Arbery talks about at length. If you don't believe me, just wait for the next chapter. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and comment on it to let me know if you learned something new today and what it was. And if you like these videos, of course, subscribe and hit the bell because I'm going to keep doing them. And we'll see you next time.